following my recent attempts at slap chop painting, following looking at some tutorials on YouTube, and following the advice and recommendation of Terry and some of the other guys down at Bedford Gladiators, I've decided to move into the 21st century. Yes, today on Dragon's Teeth, we're looking at speed paints. So yeah, as you may have seen if you've been following the channel recently, I thought I'd give this slap chop method, or whatever you want to call it, a go. Basically, it's 3 undercoats, black base coat, grey highlight, and then a white highlight on top of that. And I tried sort of thinning the paint a bit and laying it over that. The results were varied. They did get better with the second attempt, but of course I was using my old paints, not really designed to do that sort of thing. So I took the plunge and I ordered a set of speed paints. Now what I ordered was this Army Painter Speed Paint Starter Set 2. I wasn't entirely sure from the online site that I bought them from what colours exactly I was getting. I couldn't see them listed anywhere. There's a picture of the box art, so I could see there were some colours. But to be honest, I wasn't too fussed, because whatever colours I got, I'm working in fantasy mostly, whatever colours I get here I can use. I'd say this was pretty good value, because these speed paints individually go for about a £5. The box of 10 was 30 something quid, 32 quid perhaps. And the first thing I noticed is you get 2 brushes come with that as well, 2 very nice brushes, so that was good. The other thing on opening the box is you get the Army Painter, the typical Army Painter from what I've seen, collection of published stuff inside. So what we have here, apart from the usual catalogue and stuff, I think there's some stickers there. I think they're stickers. But we get this rather splendid painting guide. So this is a little booklet, about 20 pages or so, that has a lot of detail on how to prime your figures, how to assemble them, and basically, do you want to go for one coat, do you want to go for layering, and everything else. So I have to say, so far everything I bought from Army Painter has been reasonably priced, very well presented, and they look like a company that actually cares about the stuff they put out. So top marks for that. Now, what colours did I actually get? So as I said, it's 10 bottles, 180ml, so they're the slightly larger bottles. We have Satchel Brown, we have Purple Swarm, we've got Grim Black Orc Skin, which is a rather nice shade of green. We've got Slaughter Red, we've got Zealot Yellow. That's not easy to say, is it? Zealot Yellow. It's like red lorry, yellow lorry. We've got Broadsword Silver, so a metallic colour there. We've got Peachy Flesh. I'm not sure what peachy means, but we'll find out. We've got Beowulf Blue, a very nice sort of rich blue. And we've got good old Pallid Bone, which is going to come in very useful, because not only am I painting a lot of fantasy figures, as you'll know with my Vampire Count army, I'm painting a lot of undead as well. So what I thought I'd do is try these paints out with the slap chop method on 3 different things that I've got to paint here. So you may remember I've got my scenery for Fallout. That's my 28mm post-apocalyptic scenery. Of course, I've got my 10mm undead army, as I just mentioned before. And I've also got some of those 28mm fantasy figures to paint as well. In particular, today I'm going to do the barbarians, which I found out from talking to Steve at Battlezone Miniatures were actually the old Grenadier models, the Grenadier molds from back in the day, the early days of D&D. So let's get started. Alright, let's begin with the really important stuff. What am I listening to today? Well, given the title of this piece, and also the fact that I'm using a rather dark purple shade for my Vampire Knights, it's got to be the classic live Made in Japan album from Deep Purple. Still stands up, I think, as one of the best live albums of all time. And yet, I know Speed King isn't on this one. It's not on the track listing. But I thought Suitable music for painting barbarians and for painting vampire knights. So let's start off with the terrain pieces. I've got about 30 or so of these. They've all been undercoated black, just a normal black spray. And the first thing is to highlight in grey. So this is using a makeup brush that I got from my favourite local store, B&M, and really just starting that highlighting process with a light dusting of grey. Once that's all done, I move on to the white, and this is now really just to pick out the edges, the corners, and highlights. Exactly the same process. You may remember I got these pieces, by the way, from Brian at Empire Games just up the road, and of course I put a link into them in the notes below. Now, as I mentioned, I've got about 30 pieces here to paint, so I thought, well, it wasn't really planned, but once I'd dry brushed and highlighted these sort of standing wall pieces, I thought, you know, they look good enough as they are. So I didn't really do any extra work on those except to give a wash. I thought that's going to save me quite a lot of time. Exactly the same process now on the 28mm barbarians. Grey and then a white highlight. And of course exactly the same for the 10mm vampires. I'm painting up a unit of heavy cavalry here. And I have to say again, once you start highlighting these, you really do appreciate the amount of detail on these figures. It's quite incredible. So that's stage one done on each of the projects. Time now to get the speed paints out and see how they work. So the first thing I tried was to paint the earth on one of these terrain pieces, and I'm using Satchel Brown for this. And I have to say I was a little disappointed at first. I think the underlying cover is perhaps a bit too dark. It certainly highlighted all the little nooks and crannies in brown, but the overlying colour seemed very faint to me. Now, I did find out later on that as the paint dries, that colour does strengthen, so that wasn't such a bad thing after all. But I did think that maybe the speed paint wasn't the best to use for this earth cover. In fact, what I decided later on was to do more of a conventional earth colour and then apply a wash over that. That seemed to me to work a little better for that kind of coverage. Next I switched to these old oil drums, and I have to say I was really impressed with the paint here. It worked really nicely. That sort of highlighted mottling effect I've got on the cans there, the speed paint really brought that out. Very easy to go on, as you can see. Just needed one coat, and you can see the effect taking place before your very eyes. So yeah, I was very pleased with that. Same thing for the Vampire Knights. I used a deep purple shade for the horses. What are they called? Horses' robes? I really should have researched that before I started, shouldn't I? But basically, well, it's not really a horse blanket, is it? But whatever they call that goes over the horse. A nice purple shade in keeping with the vampire theme. And again, that flowed really nicely and really picked out the highlights and the shadows. So yeah, once again, very easy, very pleased with the result. So the barbarians next, and I didn't have such good results with the peachy flesh, but then I think this was my own fault, because with the barbarians I left the figures quite dark. They needed a lot more white highlight on them, I think, because the black and even the grey, that peachy flesh, didn't work so well on it. In fact, I ended up trying to mix in some flesh colour from one of my old paints, and that just made a bit more of a mess, because the speed paint and the old style paint really didn't mix well together. So what I ended up doing was that overall peachy flesh sort of coat, and then I had to wait quite a long time for that to dry, and I went over and highlighted it with the old flesh tone. So lessons learnt: if doing flesh in the future, it needs a lot more of a white undercoat. So let's take a look at the final results, and here's that terrain cover. Really pleased with those drums. That's just the speed paint over the base coats and a wash put on top, and these yellow containers really came out nicely as well. Again, exactly the same process with the Zealot yellow, and that was the same thing for all of these pieces really. The black, the grey, the white, and then speed paint on top. The only other thing I added was, I mentioned on some of the earth there, I either highlighted or used an old brown, conventional brown, just for the earth. That seemed to look a bit better. But overall I'm really pleased with these, and I think for terrain pieces, just for general scatter terrain, they look perfect. And then we're on to the barbarians. So aside from those issues with the skin, which I suspect was my fault, everything else went really well. The broad-tooled silver worked really nice on the chainmail there. The blue looks really good on the cloak. I think I used satchel brown for the sort of wood parts and some of the boots and everything else. So these are about 80% speed paints, and then the rest a few details picked out with my old conventional paints. And again, these will work great for my fantasy skirmish game. And finally, the Vampire Knights, all based up and ready to go. So the speed paints on here were the armour, the horses' apparel, and the weapons as well. The shields and one or two other bits were done with conventional paints. Once everything was finished, they were just given a wash, a little bit of highlighting here and there. And I think there's so much detail on these that wash and that highlighting, that detail really does pop. It makes them so easy to paint and to get a good effect. And yeah, as I've said before with these 10mm figures, I think once you've got them painted and based up and put together on the tabletop, it really does look like a huge mass of troops ready to fight a massive army. So yeah, very effective. There we go, that's my first attempt at using speed paints, my second or third attempt at using the slap chop method. Much better than last time. Where the speed paints worked, they worked really well. I was really pleased with the way a lot of that come out. Where they didn't work so well, I think was due to my technique really. Particularly, as I mentioned with the barbarians, I didn't put enough grey or white highlight on, so colours like that peachy flesh really don't sit well on top of black. So there we go. I know for next time, the next batch of figures I'm going to use these. I'm probably going to paint up some of the ghouls and zombies from my 10mm army, and I'm going to put a lot more highlights on those in order to really help the paints do their job. So yeah, I'm happy with these. I'm going to be looking at getting some other sets. This is set 2, so that implies obviously there's a set 1. It would be nice on the advertising, again, maybe that's just the particular site I saw them on, to have a little more detail of what colours are actually in the box, but there's nothing here that I won't use. And this has also encouraged me to get some speed paints in some of the more base colours as well, because going through my paints here, particularly my browns and greys, I've got a lot of my old Tamiya paints still, and frankly they're just like sludge. So while doing this, I was working with a lot of them, chucked a load out because they're no good anymore, and I'll be replacing those with Army Painter speed paints or their normal paints, and also I might be getting some of the Vallejo colours as well, because I found they work really well. So thanks for watching today. If you haven't used speed paints and you were thinking about using them, I hope that encourages you to give them a go. They really are straightforward to use. And thanks to everyone who recommended those to me to try out. As always, if you've got any comments, questions or suggestions, please pop them in the box below or send me an email at dragoteeth@outlook.com. And as always, please, if you haven't already, do like, share and subscribe to the channel. That's it for today. I'll see you next time.